doing it on the smaller looms. On the little 8-inch looms, I mean, it's so... I just kind of assume that I'm going to have enough yarn, but I have a large amount of stash. But let's say that, yeah, like on a bigger loom, like the 32-inch loom, like Misty said that she was using, yeah, you're going to want to kind of calculate what you're going to need, because I've been in that place before too, where I've tried to go and warp my loom and had to go back to the yarn store and buy more of that yarn. For art weaving, a lot of times too, if I find I'm running short on a specific yarn I want to use for a warp, since it is art weaving, a lot of times I will use different yarns within the warp. So maybe, you know, keep the yarn that I have in the middle and then do a different warp on the ends, you know, and add like maybe something like a fun fur or something to add a little texture in the middle. Art weaving's really forgiving. Anyway, so I'm going to switch the screen because I want to share with you. All right, let me get this pulled up. Okay, in the link below that I put in the description, and if you're looking at this on the blog post, I think I put a link. This is a calculator from Weavolution. And this calculator is pretty cool, except for, let me tell you, it's designed with very traditional weaving in mind. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that when you're approaching it with, when you're approaching art weaving, there's some things that maybe aren't as critical as far as this calculator goes. But I'm going to go through, like, let's say we're planning out a warp for Misty's rigid head loom. Okay, so as you can see right here, you go through and you just fill in the blanks and then hit calculate. So the length of the finished piece, let's say we've got a let's say we're going to do like a wrap, okay? Because like if you got a 32-inch loom, then that's going to be a good size. I think this I did almost the full width, and that's a 36-inch loom, so that came out to be probably about 2 feet. Okay, so that's a good size, you know, kind of wrap. So let's say the length of that, and I like this one I did, let's see, I want to say that this one was, that's, you know, that goes around twice. That's a big wrap. That's a big shawl wrap. But for as far as like a wrap goes, I mean, there's plenty of room to, you know, sling it across. So let's say you're going for something about like that. Okay. I would say start with maybe 80 inches. 80's a good length, I think, for a good oversized wrap, to be able to wrap it around your head once. Alright, the quantity to weave. We're only going to do one. The fringe length. I think the fringe on this I did was about 8 inches. 8 inches. Okay, so Faith said that a cricket loom at 70 inches and it was way too short. You know what, as for that matter, let me go ahead and just measure what this is. That would probably be the best, you know. Let me see if I got my I've got my big old tape measure. Okay, let's see. So this is this is right at 78 inches without the fringe. So that's, I'm just going to call that 80, because then we're going to calculate the extra that goes on top of that. So, all right, so this one is 78 inches, and that's without the fringe. All right, but we'll get to that. All right, so the fringe, is, let's see, yeah, the fringe is right at about 8 inches. So 8 inch for fringe length. Sampling length. Now, you know, if I'm doing an art weaving, I'm not going to be sampling. But if I'm doing something on the 4-shaft loom, which is going to require some patterns, then I'm probably going to sample. So it's just up to you. If you want to do it, it's kind of like get engaged with knitting. So if you are not for sure if you're going to like, you know, some of the yarn you're going to use, then yeah, sampling's a good idea. So let's say you're going to give yourself maybe 20 inches for sampling. Loom waist, they say 24 inches for loom waist. And I find the smaller the loom, the less of the loom waist you're going to get. But to err on the side of being safe, then maybe we should just leave that at 24 inches. All right. They automatically put in that the take up, and the take up being what it takes for the yarn to go over and under, over and under, over and under the warp, since we're calculating the warp, under the weft threads, is what the take up is. And then shrinkage is when you take it off the loom. And shrinkage too, for a lot of times, if I'm doing a shawl that's going to have a lot of locks and stuff like that in it, or really fragile yarn, I don't wet finish it. So that means that you're not going to have as much shrinkage. This I didn't wet finish yet, but I probably will do a light wet finish, even though there's a little bit of this like locks and stuff in it. But other than that, I think the rest of the yarn is pretty, you know, it's not going to be that bad. So it 10% shrinkage is not a terribly conservative number. I think if you're going to like really wet finish it, I would go with even more, closer to like 15 to 20%. All right, but let's leave that at 10 for now. Finished width of one piece, including the mount for hems. Well, if you're on a 32 inch loom, really that's going to be as far as you can go. And then we're going to have to consider the loom shrinkage, and I'm going to show you. So I'm going to start off with the 32 inches, because really that's the width of, that's as far as you can weave on a 32 inch loom. But we're going to have to adjust that in a minute, and I'll show you why. All right, so you have to account for the 10% width shrinkage and the draw in, especially if it's weft face. So draw in. Now width shrinkage, I guess they're talking about when you wet finish it, and then the draw in is kind of like similar to the take up, I believe, because once you take it off the tension of the loom, it's going to kind of suck back in. All right, so we'll just leave that at that. And then the warp set is whatever size of your rigid heddle is. So I know what comes with the loom, I think, is a 7.5. You know, it could also be like a 5 or a 2. It's just whatever you plan on weaving with. So that's what you set there. And then any ends that you would have for floating and selvage. Now, floating ends are the ones that you don't set within the into the heddle, that just kind of sit on the side, that kind of hold the selvage of the yarn as you're putting the weft across. And for a lot of my art yarn stuff, I didn't even do that. You know, I just was mindful as to whether that end yarn was being included within the weft as I shot it back and forth. So you know, for now I think usually I put maybe 2, because you have one on each end, but we'll see. All right, and then yards per pound. That is usually, if your yards per pound, usually let's say I do a lot of sock yarn for my warp. So that is usually 400 yards per skein, which is a 4-ounce skein. There's 4 skeins within a pound. So that's 4 times 400, which is 1600. And I don't know that that's going to necessarily be anything except for when you're calculating your material cost down here. But all right. So when you calculate the warp, this is what you come out with as far as the total warp required. But you see right here where it says the width in the reed, you're going to need 38.4 inches. Well, if your loom is only 32 inches, then you're going to have to adjust this number right here. So I'm going to try and get the width in the reed here down to 32. And I think when I went and tried 26, see, okay, so that got it to 31.2. So really the widest you can get on this piece within a 32-inch loom is really 26 inches when it's all said and done. All right, does that make sense? I know it seems like a lot of math, but that's why I gave you guys a link to that's why I gave you guys a link to this Weavolution thing. So right here you can see the total warp required is 967.6 yards, or 9.7 ounces. Okay, so that's going to be, if you've got a 4-ounce skein of sock yarn, so that's going to be 3 skeins of sock yarn, and then you're going to have some left over. Now you can go through and also calculate your weft, and if you were just using like one type of yarn, then I think really you can kind of plan on having, if you're doing a balanced weave, and that's just, let me show you, balanced weave would be on this piece something that's more like this right here, and you know, where there's not really anything going on, where the warp and the weft are pretty even. So if that was the case, then I would account for having the exact same amount of warp yarn as weft yarn, because if it's balanced, then you're using the same amount of yarn and tension. But when you're doing art weaving, that kind of gets thrown out the window because you're using different weights of yarn. I mean, here I have a little bit of lace yarn, or you might have some bulky yarns like here. Or there might be places where you're doubling up the yarn, you know, with a little accent yarn. So the best I can tell you is, once you see what the ounces are that you need, that are required, I would go ahead and pull together the yarn that you want to use in your art weaving. And you will need at least that 9.7 ounces. So let's say 10 ounces. You would need at least 10 ounces. So just get you a kitchen scale and just start piling in there. You know, I would always err on the side of having way more yarn than you think you need, because, you know, you never know. I mean, when you're doing this kind of weaving, you know, you're going to be using a little bit of a bunch of different kinds of yarns. But you would need at the very least 10 ounces of yarn for the weft. So I hope that wasn't, let me check my notes to make sure I covered everything. I hope that wasn't too confusing. I know that for artists the math thing is confusing, and having to do the math is kind of frustrating. Now Misty, I know you mentioned that you were using a warping peg. You could always approach it and just throw this whole calculator out the window, and always just approach it with just having a big pile of yarn that you want to use for the warp, and just, you know, not even having to worry about using the same yarn for the warp, and just paint with yarn as far as the warp goes. And I'm going to link down in the comments description after we get off of this where I show you how I warp my smaller rigid head loom using a bunch of different yarns, and you can kind of do the same type of thing and just kind of freeform as far as the warping goes as well. And that's what I would do. I mean, like I said, I rarely use the calculator, but that's not to say that I haven't been stuck with being short some sark yarn for a very balanced weave piece. All right. Oh, and I also wanted to talk to you because you know what totally kills me, especially with the bigger looms, is that you end up with all this loom waste. Look at, for that shawl that I had, look at all this loom waste that I had. Isn't that crazy? And a lot of this is hand spun. So it kind of breaks my heart that I have, like, you know, a small skein worth of hand spun all in these kind of shorter lengths. But here's the thing. These shorter lengths of hand spun are perfect for like just adding to art weaving, and I could even have it to where the ends are hanging out. I could use them as floats. I could you know, tie little knots and have some fringes hanging out in the middle. So there's things that you can do with that loom waste. I know a lot of weavers say, oh, they just throw their loom waste away, and that might be fine if I'm dealing with like the little rayon yarns that they tend to use, but when it comes to my hand spun, I'm a little more adamant about using every inch of that, as you can well imagine. So anyway, so that's it for this live cast. Do you guys have any questions? I know that I threw a lot of information at you, but that calculator is really awesome. And like I said, I put the link for it not only in the blog post replay, but in the description of this video. So anyway, I'm going to give it a few minutes to see if you guys have any questions. Oh, and is there anything else, any ideas that you guys want me to cover as far as more videos go? I would be beautiful as rayon knots. Yes, absolutely, they would be beautiful as rayon knots. Yes, 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 yes. Especially because I don't know if you can see in. Let's see if you can see right there. The you can see it's starting to unravel a little bit. So I think that as it gets like towards the end, and even if it gets a little fluffy and starts to unravel, or even tie little knots in there to hold it. Yeah, really, really nice raya knots. I'm probably slaying that. All right. Any other questions? I also have another printable worksheet that does this, but this is easier because it does the math. What is loom waste, please? Loom waste. Loom waste is when you're warping on the loom. And you know what? I'm going to show you I'm going to pick this up. All right. Yeah, wait, hold on. You know what? Let me change it over to where it's just this. Okay. So loom waste. I'm going to take you over to this loom over here if I can. All right. So as you can see right here, I don't know if you guys can see this. Let me turn this light on. Oh my goodness. Okay, you guys are probably getting dizzy. All right, you can see where I'm tying on right here to the beam. And so right under here where it's tying onto the beam, and that's probably about a good 12 inches right there. And so some of this will turn into fringe, but the rest of it is cut off the loom. Now on the back side, you know, once I get all the way to here, you know, once the warp comes all the way to here and I cut it off the loom, you know, my weaving is going to end way over here. So all of this between here and here is loom waste. So that's what they mean by loom waste. I mean, it's kind of the yarn that that you need to attach it to the loom, but it's not going to end up in the weaving. So I hope that makes sense. Anyway, so yeah. And like I said, if you're using some, cheaper cotton yarn or rayon yarn, you're not going to be as sad about the loom waste. But when you're using your good hand spun, yeah, you want to find some way to recycle. There's you could also, this is a little crazy, but tie knots. If you've seen those magic balls, you can always add these short lengths of yarn to some magic balls and do that. But that's what I would do with the loom waste anyway. And usually the lengths of the yarn, especially when you're cutting the stuff from the end at the very end of the weaving, from the back of the loom to where you're weaving, that stuff is usually long enough to do something with. So there you have it. All right, I hope that was helpful. That's a lot of waste. Yeah, it is a lot of waste. That's why I guess a lot of time we have loom waste and rigid heddle weaving. Yeah, but in rigid heddle, the rigid heddle weaving, it's not as much as a bigger loom. And also I find the smaller the loom, the smaller the loom waste. That being said, I know on the 6-inch, the 8-inch samplet, the most that I can warp on there really is about 4 yards. I think once you get past 12 feet of warp, it's too much on the beam, between the beam and the heddle. There's not enough room to fit it. So you're kind of limited as far as that goes as well. But yeah, you're right. There's not as much loom waste on a rigid heddle. And the loom waste that I get off of that, if it's tiny, if the loom waste on the rigid heddle is, not that much, usually I just keep it as fringe, and then whatever's left, I'll card back into bats. I'll snip it into smaller pieces, and it becomes neps in the bats for my next yarn. So that's a way to recycle some of that fiber. It's also great for felting. Yeah. So needle felting. You can needle felt, little bits into stuff. All right. Is there any more questions? Yes, no. All right. So if you have anything you want me to cover in videos, then let me know. Either hit in the comments of this video or send me an email. And I'm also gonna see if I can put a link in the blog post. I have a worksheet that does the same type of thing as the Weavolution, but you're gonna have to do the math yourself. And it's a slightly different, but it's similar. It's a similar way to calculate how much warp and weft that you will need. I think what was left over, and only use drop spindle. So they're kind of pretty. Yes, oh my goodness, yes. If I had loom waste of drop spindle yarn, that would make me nuts. How do you count for long fringe? Maybe a video on making crazy fringe. Oh, that would be a good one. I will definitely cover that. Crazy fringe. Maybe we'll make it into like an overall embellishment. How about that? Embellishing your art weaving. Different ways to do that. All right. Yay. Thanks for joining me. And I'm going to also post a link, like I said, on the blog post of a download, which is like you can print out a physical worksheet and print that out. And then that way you can also have documentation of your weaving if you need it. Otherwise, that Weavolution worksheet where it does the calculations for you is awesome. So anyway, have a great week, and I will talk to you guys next Wednesday. Bye.